Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Blue Ox base plate kit with removable arms on our 2020 Chevrolet Equinox. Now our Blue Ox base plate kit is going to give us a solid attachment point so we can hook up our tow bar so that we can safely flat tow our Equinox down the road. Because let's face it, whenever we want to take our motorhome with us, we go on a trip, it's a lot easier to drive our Equinox around once we get to the campgrounds and park our motorhome. Because say we need to go to the gas station or maybe we want to go out to dinner, it's definitely a lot easier to maneuver this around than trying to drive your motorhome. Now on the front of our Equinox, you can see we have the silver arms that are going to be sticking out. That's actually what our tow bar is going to hook up to. But whenever we're not towing, we have the option of removing the arms. You just pull on this ring, rotate the arms, and it'll slide right out. Now we can have a really clean look. We don't have anything sticking out too far, and it honestly kind of blends into the bottom of the lower grill here. Now you want to make sure you don't have a bunch of debris and dirt inside the receiver tube of your base plate, so Blue Ox does provide you with these caps, so whenever you're not towing, we make sure that receiver tube is nice and clean. And the arms are extremely easy to put in. We want to make sure that tab on the end of the arm is the flat section is pointing up and down. Put the arm in. I'm going to press it in until that ring pushes out. Rotate it, and it locks right into position. Now the base plate is going to have a couple provisions. They're going to have these two rods that are coming out. Makes it really easy to mount up any kind of electrical socket. We have a 6-pole mounted here, but if you mount it a 4, 5, or a 6-way, it just gives you a really clean spot right underneath the license plate. Now just to the right of that, we have our breakaway switch mounted. There's actually a tab further back behind the grill, but again, just makes it really easy so we don't have to put any additional holes or find a spot to mount any of our accessories on the front. And the safety chain connection point is also a big thing. People don't really think about it, but once you start hooking everything up, having them in a really easy to reach spot is definitely helpful. Sometimes they may be on the outside of the arms. Well, you see here, we wouldn't really have a whole lot of space. We probably have to cut something. So here they come out right in the center on either side of our license plate. Extremely easily accessible. Can hook up our safety cables. Don't have to worry about trying to fight getting underneath something or working around the tabs. Now one big thing to consider when you're looking at a base plate for your Equinox is going to be the compatibility of the tow bar you're going to be working with. Our Blue Ox base plate is compatible with several Blue Ox motorhome mounted tow bars. And those are going to be the tow bars that slide directly into the receiver tube on the motorhome. Now our base plate does work with other manufacturers' tow bars. It's just going to need an adapter that is sold separately, but you can find those here at etrailer.com. But now that we've seen what our base plate looks like on the front of our Equinox, let's go ahead and show you how easy it is to hook up to the tow bar. So we got a Blue Ox tow bar on the back of our motorhome. And once you have your tow bar on the back of your motorhome, you just want to lift it up, bring the arms out. We're going to open them up. And then on our Blue Ox here, we have that triple lug design on the end of the tow bar. So we want to line up our tow bar with the base plate to where those holes are going to go through. And then we can take the included pin, make sure our holes are lining up, put it all the way through, then we'll repeat that for the other arm. And then with our safety cables, you just want to make sure that you do cross them. So I'm taking the one from the passenger side. I'm going to cross it underneath the tow bar and hook it to the driver's side. And vice versa with the other cable. Then we'll hook up our electrical connector. And finally, hook up our breakaway switch. Now with these, typically what I like to do is you want to make sure that you have it hooked to the motorhome and not to the safety cables or anything else. So I'll take the end hook here, I'm going to feed it underneath all my other accessories. I'm going to go through my safety cable loop and then just hook the cable back to itself. Now keep in mind, this is only going to be one component of a full safe flat tow setup. To completely flat tow your Equinox down the road, you're going to need a base plate, a tow bar to hook up to your base plate, safety cables, your tow bar wiring, and a braking system. Now you can find all of those and the wide variety of different options that we carry here at etrailer.com. But now that you've seen how easy it is to get everything hooked up, let's go ahead and bring our Equinox back into the shop and we can go through the installation process together so you can have the confidence to do it at home. To begin our installation, we want to open up the hood on our Equinox, and right on the front here, right where our grill is, we're going to have 6 fasteners. There'll be 3 on each side of the hood latch. We're going to grab a T15 Torx bit and we're going to pull all 6 of these screws out. We want to move to the front, right in front of the front tire, the wheel well right here, right at the very edge. If we just come in on the inside of the liner, we're going to have several fasteners that are holding that liner in place. There should be a total of 5 of them if we start right where the fender meets the fascia and work our way down. You're going to want to use that same T15 Torx bit, and we want to pull all 5 of those screws out. We'll just go through, make sure we remove all 5 of these, and then we're going to have 5 on the other side, so we'll pull those out as well. And once we have that last fastener pulled out, I want to grab the wheel well liner, kind of get behind it. I'm going to peel it away. I want to pull it back so we can get access inside for a few different things. We're going to have some lights here on the front. Should be able to reach in, and we can disconnect the sockets so we don't have to worry about it. There's a little red tab on one of them. We'll pull down on that red tab. We want to squeeze the bottom section. We can disconnect the connector, and then for the larger one right here, we should be able to just twist and the entire socket will come out. Now if we move up to where the fender meets our fascia here, right behind the liner, if we come in, there's actually a bolt that's going from the top going down. So we want to grab a 7mm socket. It's a little tight of a spot to reach, but you want to get in there with your 7mm socket and pull that bolt out. Now we're going to have that same bolt and the electrical connectors over on the other side. So you want to pull that liner down, pull all the bolts out, disconnect the electrical, and pull that bolt out up top here as well. Now we want to move underneath the very front of our Equinox. Now on the front edge here, there's going to be a total of 6 bolts that are holding our front fascia in place. But if we come to the very edge, right behind this deflector, we're also going to have another bolt on each corner that's holding the fascia in place. So we need to pull this one out. So we'll grab a 7mm socket, pull this one out, move to the other side, pull that one out as well. Then we can pull all 6 of them out that are spanning across the very front here. There'll be 3 on each side. Just want to pull all these bolts out. Now I recommend getting an extra set of hands because we're going to start to pull our fascia off. Now you want to start where the fender meets the fascia. You're just going to grab the edge, kind of pull outward, and that'll start releasing some of the clips. We just want to work our way across. Now one thing I do want to mention is right by the headlight here, there is a small tab that's holding the grill in place. You don't want to just rip it off. You do kind of need to lift it up a little bit like that to unlock it because we don't want to break that tab. We're just going to work our way across, and you see once you get to about the corner there, if you lift up on that grill section here, it should start to loosen up a lot easier. You do want to double check for any kind of wires or electrical connectors, because even though we did disconnect our wiring and our lights here, we actually have the main harness on the passenger side. So we'll go ahead and lower that red tab, push in on the black tab. Can be a little bit tight. We'll disconnect it. Then we're going to set our fascia aside somewhere where it won't get scratched or damaged. So we need to pull out our driver's side headlight. Now there's going to be a total of 4 bolts holding it in. The first 2, we'll have one right at the corner towards the core support here. And if we follow our headlight back, there's going to be another one that's right by the fender, right by the washer neck. So we'll take a 7mm socket, and we're going to pull both of those out. Now there's 2 more bolts that are holding it in. We'll come down, and right, if we look inside, right behind our horn here, there's going to be another bolt that's actually underneath the headlight. It's kind of hard to see unless you get down there. So you're going to want to grab an extension and another 7mm socket so we can pull that bolt out. If you come right from the front, you should go right above the horn and be able to access that bolt. Then we'll move over to the very side over by our washer tank. We're going to have one more bolt that's going to be right by the fender here that's holding it in place. You kind of want to lift up on this back tab. It should allow you to get your headlight out. And we'll find the connector. It's going to work just like all the other ones. Release that red locking tab. Push down on the gray tab. And you should be able to separate the connectors. If you're having a little bit of trouble, you may want to get a screwdriver, push down on that tab, and it'll allow it to unlock. We can set our headlight aside for now, because obviously we are going to reinstall this. And we're also going to have to remove our washer bottle. There's going to be a total of 4 fasteners holding it in. We're going to have one that's at the very bottom. It's kind of behind the washer tank here. And then if we move up, we'll have a nut that's holding onto the edge of the frame here. And then at the very top, before the neck, we'll have one here. And then if we follow the neck up, we're also going to have another bolt right on the inside, right by our battery here. You can pull all 4 of those out, and they're all going to be 10mm. So we can grab a 10mm socket and start pulling those out. Now you don't have to worry about the washer tank falling or anything. So we can loosen all the fasteners and don't have to worry about it coming down, falling, or anything like that. Now for this one up here that's really close to the filler neck, I recommend using a ratcheting wrench just because there is a very limited space here between the battery, and I don't know if you're going to be able to get a socket in there to loosen everything up. So we can disconnect all the plugs before we pull the tank out, so we don't have to worry about all these wires. We'll have a gray one. It's a red tab, just like all the other connectors. Pull that red tab out, squeeze the connector, we'll be able to pull that connector out. Now the blue one here is going to be a little bit different. You'll see that it's got a little tab on there, but if you get yourself a really small screwdriver, we're going to come into that tab. You see how it kind of pops up a little bit? If you push on the connector, it'll unlock it and it'll disconnect it really easy. Same thing with the black one down here. We'll come inside that tab, kind of put a little bit of pressure going upwards. You'll hear that click. It's locked in place now. Hear that click. Just push it up. We can disconnect the connectors. So we can grab our washer tank. Just keep in mind there are some hoses still attached to it, and it is on that stud. But we want to kind of work our washer bottle neck out a little bit. And if we come up towards the neck, the filler neck, we are going to have our connections for the hoses. Now, you can either disconnect them at the hose here at the quick coupling. That's what I would suggest. because then we can actually set our washer bottle aside and not have to try to fight all the hoses and everything, because we do need to move it out of the way. So I'll go ahead and disconnect them here. So these are really tight, but if you see how there's that little notch in the center, if we squeeze on either side of that notch, now again, these are extremely tight, but we should be able to squeeze it to where that center section will slide past the ring. And again, it's very tight. You may actually need to get a pair of pliers. You just want to be extremely careful because it is plastic, so we don't want to damage it. Now the nice thing is once you do get those hoses disconnected, it shouldn't drip too much. There's maybe a little bit of water left in the lines, but to make sure, they do have opposite ends on them, so we can actually just connect them back together, so that way the water and washer fluid will just keep circulating through the tank, and there's no way to hook these up backwards because we're going to have the opposite end on each one of our hoses. Just grab our washer tank. Just want to maneuver it so you can get the filler neck out, and we'll set this aside for now. At the very front, if we look right on the bottom, right below our bumper here, we're going to have our temperature sensor. I'm going to unhook this, slide that red tab backwards. You may need a screwdriver, trim panel tool, something like that. Slide that tab backwards, press in on the other tab, and pull away from the sensor. Should disconnect it. Again, pushing on that tab of the screwdriver may help. Then we can come to the front side and we'll have our actual temperature sensor. It's going to be poking through this plastic tab. If you twist it, it's going to kind of start to, you'll see those tabs are going to move in a little bit. Kind of get it into an unlocked position. If you need to though, kind of just push those tabs in. We want to pop it back out through the back side. Now just so I don't lose this, I'm going to go ahead and plug it back in. Make sure it's plugged all the way in. Then slide that red locking tab back down. Well, that brings us to the front section here. We're going to have these push pins that are holding these air deflectors in on each side. When you pull these push pins out and pull that deflector out, so you grab a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool. Each one of the push pins is going to have this little notch in it. And that's so you can come underneath the center section, because you want to pop that out first. Then we come underneath the base, pull the rest of the push pin out. Now we're going to do that for the remaining push pin on this side, as well as the two on the other side. And then we want to pull the air deflector completely out. May have to kind of pull down a little bit because there is a tab here that's attached to on the bottom. So just pull down a little bit. You just want to work the tab over so that it's out of the way like this. We'll move to the other side and repeat that same process. Now you can actually take that whole panel. You can leave it down here, but we can go ahead and pull that panel out for now, and we'll set it aside. Now on each side of the frame here, if we look right at that bumper structure that's coming out, we're going to have this flange coming off the bottom of it. Now that is going to be on both sides. Now our base plate is going to be sitting right against this flange, but we need a little bit of room. So we need to grab a hammer, and we're going to be tapping that flange towards the middle of the car, just about 1/8 of an inch. You don't need a whole lot of movement. We don't want to bend it, but we want to just slightly curve it in just enough so we have a little bit of clearance on both sides. And again, we're just talking a very slight amount. Give it a couple taps because it is pretty thin and we're not trying to curve it. We just want it to bend in about 1/8 of an inch on each side. So just a few taps. And we'll move to the other side and kind of taper that side in as well. Now with the next set of hands, we're going to grab our main receiver brace for our base plate, and the edges here, where these 3 holes are on the side, that's going to go right at that flange on the outside that we just tapped with the hammer. So we'll lift it up, and again we want to get those 3 holes lined up on the side of that tab, and then the back we want to go all the way against the back of the frame rail. Now there's nothing really holding our base plate in place, so you want to get a clamp. You want to clamp it directly to the frame, and you may need to make minor adjustments once you get the clamp in place, but you want to make sure that your base plate's not going to fall, and then it's secure, and we can start working on drilling out the holes we need to. Then you have your base plate in place and it's clamped up. You want to make sure that top edge is nice and flush against the bottom of the bumper beam, and the back is as close to the back of that frame rail as you can get it. Now we want to drill out one of these top holes, and that'll get everything lined up. That way we can use our base plate as a template to get the rest of them. So I'm going to come back with a 3/8 drill bit, and I'm going to drill out one of the top holes. So really it doesn't matter which one, you just kind of want to pay attention to where your clamp is. But we're going to drill all the way through that flange until we can come out the other side and we get some hardware through. Once the hole's drilled, you want to grab one of your 3/8 bolts, double check that it's going to fit, because if you use the 3/8 bit, you may have to go just one drill bit size larger or just wallow it out a little bit, because if you haven't ever noticed, it's extremely hard to get the same size bolt through the same size hole, so we need a little bit of room. We're going to take that 3/8 bolt, we're going to put a bead of Loctite on the bolt, and make sure you grab a 3/8 lock nut, go all the way through the base plate so it comes into the inside of the frame. Then we'll take that lock nut and we want to secure it onto the edge of the bolt. Now for now we just need to get it on there hand tight, make sure it actually grabs and threads on, and then we'll come back with a wrench and socket and tighten up all the way so we can pull that clamp off. Now you want to use a 9/16 wrench and socket, and again we just want to tighten this all the way up. So now that we have that one in place, we want to get the other side drilled out and get at least one. That way the base plate will hold itself in place. Once we have that done, we can remove the clamps, and we want to continue drilling out the top 2 holes that are remaining, and then on the side here towards the back of our Equinox, the 2 small round holes, we're going to drill those out, and it's going to get the same combination of hardware. It's going to be the same on both sides, so we're just going to continue drilling out all those locations and putting the rest of our hardware in place. So once you have all your hardware in place on both sides, one thing you do kind of want to pay attention to is on the driver's side here where that large hole towards the back is, we want to make sure that that weld nut on the inside is still exposed so we can actually get our washer tank put back in place properly. So we can grab our plastic air dam where we had our temperature sensor mounted, and what I like to do is just loosely get everything kind of lined up roughly to where it would be sitting, but obviously you can see the base plate is in the way for us to slide this back in. So instead of cutting everything up and doing exactly as the instructions say, I'm actually just going to trim off the area that's in the way of the base plate. So I'm just going to make a cut right about here, right where this taper is. We can put our push pin back in place on the lower sections, and then on the upper section, I'm just going to cut this area out, and then maybe cut this rubber piece out because it's going to be behind here. But that way we still have our temperature sensor mount as well as the push pin to put everything back in place. And since it is just plastic, I'm just going to use a pair of tin snips. And again, like I said, I'm just going to kind of loosely line everything up, hold it up there, maybe make a little bit of a mark with my tin snips. That way I have a reference of how far over I need to cut. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Just get everything real loosely lined up. And then we're just going to cut out that center tab section here. And again, since it's going to be becoming two pieces, you want to hold on to that upper piece, or you can trim it out to where they're still connected. But either way, whatever's easiest for you at home, just want to trim out that center piece so that we can fit our panel back in. And we're just going to use those existing push pins to put it back in place. So we don't need that center piece anymore. So this upper piece can just slide right back in, just like that. Put our push pin in place. And then the lower section is going to slide in just like that. And you just got to trim the driver's side. And then now that we have our air deflector back in place, we can take our temperature sensor. You want to make sure you feed it through that access hole. Make sure it's pointing in the right direction. Just kind of push through, make sure those tabs spread out and it's nice and secure. Now before we get too far, you want to make sure that you torque down all the bolts holding your base plate in place. And again, we're going to be using that 9/16 wrench and socket. Make sure you hold the nut on the back side while you're torquing down the bolt. We're going to go through and we're going to repeat that for all of the hardware we have holding our base plate in place. At this point, we can take our washer bottle. We can kind of sneak it back into place. Just want to make sure the neck is on the inside. You start lining everything back up. And we're going to be reusing most of the factory hardware. On that stud, take the factory nut. I like to get everything on there just real loose because it gives us enough movement to where we can line up the rest of our hardware. Reuse the factory bolt for the top two. One right here. And then also the one by the filler neck. Now that one down at the bottom that's kind of recessed in, we don't want to use the factory hardware. They're going to give you a new bolt and flat washer in your kit. And that's just to take up some of that extra space, because once we added our base plate in, it did make it a little bit thicker and we need a longer bolt that we would get it in place. But we'll come back with a 10mm socket and tighten up all of the hardware holding our washer tank in. That's the nice thing about these connectors. You can't put them in incorrectly because they're all going to be different. Just want to make sure you hear that click, put the locking tab down, make sure they're all secure. Then we can come to our hoses. And again, you want to squeeze those sides of it, disconnect the hoses, and we can reconnect them to the one up top. Just going to feed the hoses up. Again, nice thing about it is they have different ends. So just plug the female into the male and the male into the female. Just want to be mindful of how you're routing your hoses. Make sure you don't get them pinched on anything. And again, make sure you hear that audible click and that they're fully locked in, because we don't want a bunch of washer fluid pooling up inside of our engine bay. We can plug in our headlight. Make sure you plug in that locking tab. And we can line up the headlight, slide it back into place. We can start putting all the hardware back in as well. Now we need to get our permanent safety cables in place. Now these are going to be making sure that our base plate is secured to the frame. There's an attachment point down here at the bottom corner. So that's where we're going to be attaching our safety cables, and we're going to use the convenience link or the quick link we have right here. So I just like to leave it open, slide it around the loop, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my safety cable, I'm going to go over the frame rail right here. You do need to watch these lines, so I like to go underneath them. That way there's no chance of the lines getting crushed by the cable. Just kind of work it in until we can get it over the frame rail. May even need to reach behind. We'll get it up past there. And we want to come down. And again, since it's going to be wrapping around the frame like this, I'm going to take one end of my safety cable, go into the convenience link, do the same thing with the other end. Now I have a nice loop that's going to go around my base plate and around my frame. I'm just going to tighten out the convenience link. And we can always take some zip ties and zip tie the excess safety cable up so it's nice and taut and we don't have to worry about it interfering with anything. So just come back and we can just tie up the excess again, either to these existing lines or we can tie the cables to themselves, but we want to make sure we put the other cable in place on the other side using the convenience link and the spot provided over there. So at this point, if you have any other components that you're going to be installing for your flat toe setup, I would definitely recommend doing that now. It's going to be a lot easier to route all your wires, any kind of lines that you may need to run while the fascia's off, because we'll have plenty of access to get everything everywhere. So we're going to go ahead and install the rest of our system, which was going to include wiring and a braking system. But we will make sure that you know how to put the fascia back on and let you know what kind of trimming we're going to have to do to get it back in place. Now the next set of hands, now that we have all of our components installed, we can get ready to put our fascia back on. Now you don't want to forget to plug in your tail light, you're plugging your turn signals and your fog lights, as well as that main harness on the passenger side. And when we get our fascia put in place, kind of want to loosely line everything up. Make sure that all those attachment points are going to go through the lower grill there. Kind of help guide everything through a little bit. And then up top here, if you remember where we had those tabs, if we can, we want to get the grill pushed up far enough to where it'll catch that tab and at least hold it in place, because it's not going to go all the way back on. As you can see, it is rubbing a little bit on some of the components, so we are going to have to do a little bit of trimming in order to get the fascia all the way back on. I like to put at least a couple of these bolts in the upper grill area, and that'll just make sure that our fascia is not going to fall down. We don't have to worry about anything. Now our lower grill here on the very outer piece, right where it starts to open up, you can see that's where our arms are going to come through. Our safety cable attachment points have no problem, along with the rest of our other components. However, this bar here going across is in the way for our arm to come through or for the arm to go into the base plate. So we need to trim this little section here, and I'm actually just going to cut right along the line of this vertical post and then kind of gradually just follow this line and cut this section out. Now you can use just about whatever you have. You can use a rotary tool, a knife, file. I'm going to use an air saw just so I can make a quick clean cut. We can always come back and kind of clean up the edges and shape it however we want to. But we're going to go ahead and repeat that on the other side so we have room for the arm to come out. Now that we know that our fascia can go back in place, it's just a matter of putting all the fasteners back in the reverse order that we took them out. It can be a little bit tight. You want to make sure you line those clips up and you get them in the right spot. We can push our fascia back in place. But once you have all your fasteners back in, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Blue Ox baseplate kit with removable arms on our 2020 Chevrolet Equinox.